For you. So this is being narrated. As Seth alluded to, there's a prologue which is narrated by a young man in present-day America, but the rest of the book is set in 1942, and the first chapter takes place on January 1st, 1942. 1, 2, 3, 4 months, 3.5 months into the siege, which ended up lasting 900 days. You have never been so hungry, you have never been so cold. When we slept, if we slept, we dreamed of the feast we had carelessly eaten 7 months earlier. All that buttered bread, the potato dumplings, the sausages, eaten with disregard, swallowing without tasting, leaving great crumbs on our plates, scraps of fat. In June of 1941, before the Germans came, we thought we were poor, but June seemed like paradise by winter. At night the wind blew so loud and long it startled you when it stopped. The shutter hinges of the burnt-out cafe on the corner would quit creaking for a few ominous seconds, as if a predator neared and the smaller animals hushed in terror. The shutters themselves had been torn down for firewood in November. There was no more scrap wood in Leningrad. Every wood sign, the slats of the park benches, the floorboards of shattered buildings, all gone and burning in someone's stove. The pigeons were missing too, caught and stewed in melted ice from the Neva. No one minded slaughtering pigeons. It was the dogs and cats that caused trouble. You'd hear a rumor in October that someone had roasted the family mutt and split it 4 ways for supper. We'd laugh and shake our heads, not believing it, and also wondering if dog tasted good with enough salt. There was still plenty of salt. Even when everything else ran out, we had salt. By January, the rumors had become plain fact. No one but the best connected could still feed a pet, so the pets fed us. There were 2 theories on the fat versus the thin. Some said those who were fat before the war stood a better chance of survival. A week without food would not transform a plump man into a skeleton. Others said skinny people were more accustomed to eating little and could better handle the shock of starvation. I stood in the latter camp, purely out of self-interest. I was a runt from birth. Big-nosed, black-haired, skin scribbled with acne. Let's admit I was no girl's idea of a catch. But war made me more attractive. Others dwindled as the ration cards were cut and cut again, halving those who looked like circus strongmen before the invasion. I had no muscle to lose. Like the shrews that kept scavenging while the dinosaurs toppled around them, I was built for deprivation. On New Year's Eve, I sat on the rooftop of the Kirov, the apartment building where I'd lived since I was 5, watching the fat gray anti-aircraft blimps swarm under the clouds, waiting for the bombers. That time of year, the sun lingers in the sky for only 6 hours, scurrying from horizon to horizon as if spooked. Every night, 4 of us would sit on the roof for a 3-hour shift, armed with sand pails, iron tongs, and shovels, bundled in all the shirts and sweaters and coats we could find, watching the skies. We were the firefighters. The Germans had decided rushing the city would be too costly, so instead they encircled us, intending to starve us out, bomb us out, burn us out. Manning my crew were my friends from the 5th floor, Vera Osifovna, a talented cellist, and the red-headed Antelkoski twins, whose only known talent was an ability to fart in harmony. In the early days of the war, we had smoked cigarettes on the roof, posing as soldiers, brave and strong and square-chinned, scanning the skies for the enemy. By the end of December, there were no cigarettes in Leningrad, at least none made with tobacco. A few desperate souls crushed fallen leaves, rolled them in paper, and called them autumn lights, claiming the right leaves provided a decent smoke. But in the Kirov, far from the nearest standing tree, this was never an option. We spent our spare minutes hunting rats, who must have thought the disappearance of the city's cats was the answer to all their ancient prayers, until they realized there was nothing left to eat in the garbage. After months of bombing raids, we could identify the various German planes by the pitch of their engines. That night, it was the Junker 88s, as it had been for weeks, replacing the Henkels and Dorniers that our fighters had gotten good at gunning down. As wretched as our city had become in daylight, after dark there was a strange beauty in the siege. From the roof of the Kirov, if the moon was out, we could see all of Leningrad. The needle point of the Admiralty Tower, splashed with gray paint to obscure it from the bombers, the Peter and Paul Fortress, spires draped with camouflage netting, the domes of St. Isaac's and the church on spilled blood. We could see the crews manning the anti-aircraft guns on the rooftops of neighboring buildings. The Baltic fleet had dropped anchor on the Neva. They floated there, giant gray sentries, firing their big guns at the Nazi artillery emplacements. Most beautiful were the dogfights. The Ju-88s and the Sukhois circled above the city, invisible from below unless they were caught in the eyes of the powerful searchlights. The Sukhois had large red stars painted on the undersides of their wings, so our anti-aircraft crews wouldn't shoot them down. Every few nights we'd see a battle spotlit as if for the stage, the heavier, slower German bombers banking hard to let their gunners get a bead on the darting Russian fighters. When a Junkers went down, the plane's burning carcass falling like an angel cast from heaven, a great shout of defiance rose up from rooftops all across the city, all the gunners and firefighters shaking their fists to salute the victorious pilot. We had a little radio on the roof with us. On New Year's Eve, we listened to the Spassky chimes in Moscow playing the Internationale. Vera had found half an onion somewhere. She cut it into 4 pieces on a plate, smeared with sunflower oil. When the onion was gone, we mopped up the remaining oil with our ration bread. Ration bread did not taste like bread. It did not taste like food. After the Germans bombed the Badaev grain warehouses, the city bakeries got creative. Everything that could be added to the recipe, without poisoning people, was added to the recipe. The entire city was starving, no one had enough to eat, and still, everyone cursed the bread, the sawdust flavor, how hard it got in the cold. People broke their teeth trying to chew it. Even today, even when I've forgotten the faces of people I loved, I can still remember the taste of that bread. Half an onion and a 125-gram loaf of bread split 4 ways. This was a decent meal. We lay on our backs, wrapped in blankets, watching the air raid blimps on their long tethers drifting in the wind, listening to the radio's metronome. When there was no music to play or news to report, the radio station transmitted the sound of a metronome, that endless tick, 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 letting us know the city was still unconquered, the fascists still outside the gate. The broadcast metronome was Peter's beating heart, and the Germans never stilled it. It was Vera who spotted the man falling from the sky. She shouted and pointed, and we all stood to get a better look. One of the searchlights shone on a parachutist descending toward the city, his silk canopy a white tulip bulb above him. "A Fritz," said Oleg Antelkovsky, and he was right. We could see the gray Luftwaffe uniform. Where had he come from? None of us had heard the sounds of aerial combat or the report of an AA gun. We hadn't heard a bomber passing overhead for close to an hour. "Maybe it started," said Vera. For weeks we'd been hearing rumors that the Germans were preparing a massive paratrooper drop, a final raid to pluck the miserable thorn of Leningrad from their advancing army's backside. At any minute we expected to look up and see thousands of parachutes blotting out the sky, but dozens of searchlights slashed through the darkness and found no more enemies. There was only this one, and judging from the limpness of the body suspended from the parachute harness, he was already dead. We watched him drift down, frozen in the searchlight, low enough that we could see that one of his black boots was missing. "He's coming our way," I said. The wind blew him toward Vanova Street. The twins looked at each other. "Luger," said Oleg. "Luftwaffe don't carry Lugers," said Grisha. He was 5 minutes older and the authority on Nazi weaponry. Walter PPK. Vera smiled at me. German chocolate. We ran for the stairway door, abandoning our firefighting tools, racing down the dark stairwell. We were fools, of course. A slip on one of those concrete steps, with no fat or muscle to cushion the fall, meant a broken bone, and a broken bone meant death. But none of us cared. We were very young, and a dead German was falling onto Vanova Street, carrying gifts from Das Vaterland. We sprinted through the courtyard and climbed over the locked gate. All the street lamps were dark. The entire city was dark, partly to make the job tougher for the bombers, and partly because most of the electricity was diverted to the munitions factories, but the moon was bright enough to see by.